My name is Verrick Foust, and this is part of our mini-series where I'm going to talk about different positions in IT and introduce you to some of the real day-to-day work that you'll be doing in these positions, and then give you some of the importance of these positions in the IT world. So today we're going to be talking about network administration techs. So network administration is roughly about an education of 2 to a 4-year degree. It requires a little bit of education because you'll have to learn some of the integral importance of network equipment, and that'll be like switches and routers. They're a little bit more complicated than your home routers, so that's why it needs a little bit of education. I do think if you had a lot of experience in these in the past, you could probably get a decent figure it out, but I would recommend getting a little bit of education into that because there is a lot to go into it. I'm not going to go into a great detail of everything that you'll have to know, but I'll try to give a few mentions of some important aspects of it. But the idea is that there's a lot of in-depth that goes into managing a switch and managing a router. One thing I do want to note is managing switches is not the Nintendo Switch, it's the network switch. So I'll try to mention that it's a network switch and not the new Nintendo Switch that came out. So I will mention that throughout the video that it's the network switch. So what a network switch is it's multiple Ethernet ports, which are, they have like a little blue. They can be multiple different colors. Most times they're standardly blue, but they can have multiple different colored coding. But at both sides, they have like this little clip that's supposed to lock in when you plug it in, and then they have like a few contacts on the back, and then there's like 8 wires connected to each one, depending on which Ethernet cord you have. If it is a standardized Ethernet cord, they have several different types of them. I'm not going to go into depth on each one of them, but there's a lot of information about these types of cords due to the different types of speeds. Essentially, that's what it looks like. It's like a plastic clip, and it's designed to lock them in place. These cords are designed to connect your computer to the network. So often what you'll see is you'll have your, for example, a desktop. You'll connect your Ethernet cord to the port of your desktop, and then you'll connect the other end to the port on the wall. That wall then has another cord connected all the way to a switch, ideally, and then that switch will be then connected to a router, and then that router will be the one that has connection to your ISP. Your ISP is being the internet provider for that business or enterprise. So that is kind of how the whole internet thing works. And then through all of this, very basic concept is there's a whole bunch of setup that has to go through. That router has to go through a whole bunch of setup, and so does that switch. So the network administrator has to go through and set that all up ahead of time. So they'll have a basic setup set up for all of them. And then as your business grows or changes, they might have to make specific changes. As your security tech changes a few policies or wants to change a few different things, they'll change a few things on their network. So as your business grows and changes, and as the landscape in the tech world changes, your network will change as well. So that's why it can be a little complicated, but I wanted to try and simplify it a little bit for you. The main point of it is it's a lot of different types of things that manage your network. It's also important to keep it very secure. Your network essentially is a room that we try to keep fairly locked down, and the only people that have keys are people that work in your network, and we don't want other people to be able to get in. That's kind of where the security tech comes into it. So he wants to make sure that nobody else can get in as well, and we do too. So that's kind of the whole point of that. So the network administrator tech will manage those types of systems. They'll try to make sure that everything's tweaked properly. And then as your business grows, they'll add more switches, more routers, so then there's more ports. So every time that you have to add another Ethernet port computer, you'll have to have another port available. So if you don't have enough ports available, you'll have to add another system. Most switches have like 42 ports. You can get ones with different variation of number of ports. So they'll put several different units in their racks where their servers are located or in other closet areas that are locked. commonly, and in different locations. So the idea then would be there'll be multiple port areas, so you can plug in multiple desktops, and then they'll have network cable threaded out through the building, and then there'll be a female connector port on the wall where you can plug in the other end for your desktop. That's the ideal situation. Sometimes it's not just for desktops, cameras can be used for it, other devices, but desktops just for this simple example. The idea of then going into then and managing these can be a little bit difficult, and which is why I was bringing up the, going through and getting the educational portion. I definitely recommend getting that. It's very useful. It helps you get a better understanding of how everything's working, how the communication factor comes in, and that type of interaction. They also have to work a lot with the ISP. When I say ISP, I'm referring to your internet provider. An internet provider would be a good example would be like MediaCom. MediaCom would be an internet provider. CenturyLink would be an internet provider. So they have to communicate to these businesses, these companies, and try to figure out, hey, we're a business. We want to get a business connection to your internet, and we need these certain requirements. This is how much internet we'll need. This is what our bandwidth is, and get these types of specifications, because enterprise internet and home internet is a little bit different. It's also different on costs. So those types of differences are important to kind of defer. These routers are also different from a generic router that you would see at a house, for instance. Most businesses don't have home-based routers. If you're a decent amount of size, you're normally using industry routers. So they're a lot larger, around the same look as a switch or a small server. So there's a lot more going into that. And normally how you would connect and manage these types of systems is you would normally use a console cord, which is another type of cord. It looks kind of like a VGA cord, and it's designed to let you look into, connected to a display, so you can get command lined into the system of it and set up everything. Otherwise, you can also set up SSH and remote into these systems. Nowadays, they're coming out with like USB-C, so it's a little bit better, but a lot of times you're still seeing the console cord. So just kind of depends on which manufacturer you're using. Some of the big heavy hitters in manufacturing for these types of systems are Cisco and Aruba. Those are probably the big main two that I've seen a lot. Aruba's been pushing ahead, but Cisco's kind of been in the ball game for the longest in terms of just like dominating, but Aruba's starting to come up. So those are just two like router and switch manufacturers that do a lot. So not only do the network administrators have to manage these types of systems, but they also have to manage communication in general. Because this is all communication based, this is computer communicating to other computer-like devices. They also manage phone systems. Phone systems are also like computers. So they manage our phones. Mattel is a good example of a phone system. Cisco, as I was mentioned before, is also creates phone systems. So these are phone systems. So whenever you go to like a hospital or anything like that, and they have phones set up there, normally there's an Ethernet cord connected to that phone, and then it's connected to kind of like a switch, and then that switch is connected to a server. That server then gets that communication set up, and that's how they're able to send those calls around. So these types of communications is also set up. So those phones are set up with servers. These server management part comes into play. So network administrator techs are kind of similar to the server administrators techs in the sense that they manage servers as well. Often you'll see network administrator techs managing servers. So they work fairly close with the server administrator techs. They don't obviously manage as many servers as they do, but they do manage some. And depending on the business, it can change. It really does depend on that. Sometimes in bigger businesses, network administrators manage very few. Smaller businesses, they manage a lot more. So it does depend, depending on the business. So I would want to state that. But they do have server management skills typically in these fields because they have to manage the phone system, and the phone system is typically hosted on a server, whether it's a virtual machine or not. Speaking of virtual machines, they also typically work with the virtual machines network layout as well. So making sure that this virtual switches and virtual routers are set up. Virtual machines obviously are set up on virtual routers and switches, so you have to go through and set those up as well. Similar concept, just using a virtual machine instead of a router. A little bit more easier in some instances because you can typically just replicate it, but they do work on that, and they typically work with the system admin after they do it once. They're typically good after that point, but they do work on that aspect. After that, they also work on firewalls a lot, setting up the firewall, setting up the whitelist, the blacklist, making sure that everything is set up as it should be, working with the security tech to make sure that what they want to go through and what they shouldn't have go through is set up as they want it to go through. So working with the security tech is very important on that aspect. I mentioned in my previous video for the security tech of that integration of working with the security tech and the network tech. So that part would come into play. Depending on what company you work, there's a couple companies that have this type of hardware. You could make your own, but normally you're outsourcing to a third party. So like FortiClient is a good example. So it depends on what type of hardware you're using, but functionally what it does is it goes through your network, and before it goes through your network, they kind of thread it out, or they kind of check everything that's going through the network first, and then they pick out anything that's bad. That's a good way to explain what a firewall does. It doesn't let anything bad through, it filters it, I think is the best way to explain it. So think of a firewall as a filter. It filters through any of the bad stuff that you have it set up in your parameters, and then it lets it all through. So it's kind of like the first thing that you would set up before you let anything go to the ISP and back. It's a good way to explain it. And then after the firewall, you might have one or two, and you might change a few other aspects of it, but essentially you're managing all the firewalls. So if you have multiple locations, you might have multiple firewalls, so you have to manage those as well. Again, when you add all of these different hardwares, you have to manage multiple different aspects, so therefore your job becomes a little bit more difficult. But it's very important that you have a network tech for this reason, because if any of these things start acting up or start not working properly, then you'll run into issues where people aren't able to connect to internet, which typically does cripple a business, or they're unable to make phone calls, which also can cripple a business. So these type of issues are very problematic. So even though the hardware is working, the communication part isn't. So it's very important that the network administrator tech takes these parts and make sure everything's working properly, communicates to both the system administrator tech and the security tech, and make sure that they're following what they're asking of them, and just working together on it. It's kind of why they're all kind of part of tier 2. It just makes it easier for them to all communicate effectively. So that's why having a very good cohesive team is very important on that aspect as well. So also one other thing that they kind of do, this kind of depends on the business you're working on again. They often manage servers a lot. They have that, underlying understanding of how servers work. So they'll often just work on servers. As I mentioned, they manage the phone system. So they'll also be managing other servers depending on your business. They'll do some of the system administrative work. There's so many servers in a business in some instances that the system administrator tech can't do it all. So they'll kind of give some to the network administrator tech to kind of lessen the load. So that can also happen in some businesses just to help out balance that load. So I completely understand that. I think that's understandable. IT has that issue of where it's like, oh, I wish we had more people. It's always that way. But understanding that scale of balance is very important. So that's one of the other things that I wanted to mention, that they typically have a great understanding of these types of how servers work, understanding how servers function. They just kind of have that extra of like how network administration works, and server administration techs can too. I don't want to take that. That's not how that necessarily works. It's just from that job title concept is kind of the same. I do want to mention that network administration tech is kind of just one general term. They can have several different names. So a business could call them something else. I'm just using this as a simple general term. Sometimes they can be called a communication administrator. I'm just using this as a general term. But that's kind of another aspect of their job could typically entail on a day-to-day basis. So these are kind of some of the things they'll be doing. In terms of like what makes it so important from a CIS team perspective, if you get a call from the help desk, where somebody's saying that their Wi-Fi isn't working, and then you get another call where somebody's saying their phone's not working, and then you get repeated calls like this in the morning, you have a good idea then at that point that it's probably a network issue or something else is happening there. You should probably call your network administrator techs, because this is a huge issue. It's going to affect a lot of people, and that it's their job then to try and remedy that issue. And it can be very huge and crippling if you can't get this resolved quickly. So it's a huge amount of pressure, but at the same time, they seem to take it very well, and they're really awesome people to work with. I've worked with a lot of network administrator techs, and they've taught me a lot. So I think they're very important in making sure that the business functions and flows properly. So that's a very key thing. And a lot of times, if you don't know something, they'll be able to look into it, and they may not know it, and they'll look into it as well. And making sure that there's like that great communication between devices. That's essentially what they do, is they create that communication between devices. Why should you be interested in this type of a position? I would say it's really because if you like learning about how technology works, how the communication aspect of a computer contacting another computer would work, and then how you manage that in an effective manner, and then how you can do that from a larger scale is really huge. And then making sure that you can be communicating to other people. One of the big things for a network administrator tech is that you don't do anything with the network until you've gone through all the proper channels of checking with people, and that you have everything kind of written out. Making sure that you can see everything, making sure that you have everything labeled really helps. When I was interning, I used to do some of the, I unhooked some of the, unplugged a few things and replugged it back in. Making sure that everything was labeled was really important, so that we could go back and do it again when we had to restring everything back in, because you have to put a lot of stuff through conduit. So doing a lot of that extra nitty-gritty work is very important. So if you like doing that type of stuff, it's really awesome, and it's probably great for you. So if, just labeling stuff, saying what this port goes to, what this port's going to, it really helps. And then staying organized is really important too, because when you are working with like 1,000 ports, it gets a little complicated to remember which port goes where. So if you could organize this section of ports are for this section, and then this section of ports are for this section of the room, then it becomes a little bit easier for you to figure out where goes what and where goes where. So it's that kind of understanding, that type of organization. You need to be really well organized to work in networking. So that's kind of what I would say if you're looking to work in networking. So I hope you guys were able to learn something here. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Bye.